was in the early 1980s. I was working nights at the time. Matter of fact, it was 81. And one morning I got up having my coffee and flipping through the television. And I stopped over one channel. First time I'd ever seen them was Jim and Tammy Bakker. I stopped because I could not believe what I was seeing. This woman looked like she had a gobs of wax on her face. I didn't have a clue what it was, so I'm just sitting there watching this and finally thinking, okay, that televangelist. This was really the first televangelist I had come across. And I'm like watching this and I'm like listening and I'm like, does anybody actually believe this bullshit? Well, I started thinking about it. I was watching it and it was kind of an ingenious idea because rather than have a bunch of churches all over the country, these idiots just did one broadcast that was broadcast all over the nation. And as I'm watching, I'm realizing they're hitting people up for money. Well, it must have been working because they obviously weren't hurting. Well, you couldn't feel too sorry for the so-called victims that were sending the money because they were stupid enough to send it. Me, I just didn't buy it. I didn't like religion at the time anyways. I definitely didn't like the televangelists. But lately I've been thinking, especially with the J-dubs no longer turning in their service hours, and I'm thinking, what if Jehovah's Witnesses were compensated for their time? Anyways, guys, let's get to it. How you doing, guys? For many of you who came into the organization from the outside, during your Bible study, how many of you said to yourself, there is no way I'm going door to door with a Bible? And yet we all did. I qualified pretty quickly to become an unbaptized publisher. I really had no problem with it at first. What I had the issue with was keeping track of the hours, keeping track of the placements. It was very distracting, especially when you get in the car and you're driving off and everybody's jibber-jabbering. Well, I had been laid off. I lost my job. The weekend I got baptized. So I had that weighing on me. I'm like, I got to get me a job. And how many of the witnesses are like, oh, don't worry about it. You just go out and field service. Jehovah will take care of your needs. I was never one for throwing caution to the wind, and that's what most of them seem to be doing. And no, they weren't. My Bible instructor used to love to push the issue. I don't work. I own my own house. Jehovah pays for everything. The little detail he left out was that his wife worked. So I knew better. So while I was going out in service, after I was baptized, I had that weighing on me. And I'm like, I didn't mind going out in service, but I needed to find a job too. But the thing was, I'm like, what is the purpose? I kept asking, what is the purpose of keeping track of your hours? I kind of understand keeping track of the placements because they know what to publish. But as far as the hours, why do they need to know? I mention this because I think we've all heard by now, Jehovah's Witnesses are no longer required to turn in their hours, which I thought was pretty strange. Now, at first I was thinking, now we've all can speculate about it, and that's basically all we've been doing, because let's face it, Watchtower's been throwing a lot of shit at the fan the last few months. But a lot of people are probably thinking the same thing I was. They're losing members left and right, so they're easing up the burden. So they're not required to turn their hours in. But I tend to doubt that. Mike and Kim brought up a good point in one of their recent videos about losing control, giving up control of the rank and file. Now, as far as giving up the shunning policy, which no, they're never going to do because that would be giving up a lot of control. Now, in a lot of ways, not required to turn in their service hours also is giving up some control. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of JWs that are ecstatic about it because it's a burden to go out in field service. But Watchtower doesn't do anything for the rank and file. They do it to them. The only thing Watchtower does is for themselves. So I started really thinking about it. I've seen a couple of videos that had discussed it. But as far as easing the burden, let's face it, in recent years, they can no longer display their growth. Now, there are two reasons why they may have done away with it and got rid of the paper trail, because they're not experiencing any growth in recent years. So obviously, they couldn't publish ministry hours because obviously they're down. Less witnesses, less hours. But what just hit me, let's face it, more and more countries are no longer recognizing Watchtower as a charity. And yet, all we ever hear when we were in, this is all volunteer work. Okay, that's fine. This is all I ever heard. And my thing is, if it's voluntary, then why do we have to put in these hours? Well, as I said, more and more countries are no longer recognizing them as a charity. And there will be more in time, I'm sure. But here's something to think about. If they are not a charity, would Watchtower be required to compensate the witnesses for their ministry hours? And not just their ministry hours. Think of all the building projects. That may be a possibility. So what Watchtower does now, do away with the requirement for turning in your service hours. There's no paper trail. They could easily say, no, they're doing this on their own. They are not required to do this when you and I both know they are. But I was really thinking about that. And the other thing, now this is going to be a double-edged sword for Watchtower, because if witnesses are not required to go out in field service, many of them, you and I know, are going to back off of it. They'll put a few minutes down the coffee shop, because who's going to know? But the other thing, if it ever does happen that Watchtower does have to compensate them, how many people would all of a sudden become pioneers? And how many people would be banging on those doors 80 and 90 hours a week just for that paycheck? No, that's something Watchtower doesn't want to have. They will do what they have to separate themselves from the rank and file. Now, with no paper trail, they could easily say, it's on them, we're not telling them to do that. So much for volunteer work. But I had just heard about this, was it last week before? And I was thinking about that, and it's like, what if JDubs were paid for their volunteer work? I mean, like I said, when I was first baptized, I was out of work, and I was hurting for a paycheck. And my idiot Bible instructor said something along the lines, well, we don't get paid for our ministry hours. And I got to thinking about it. It would be an opportune time if we did. But I thought it was kind of funny at that. But that was just something to think about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. That's pretty much all I got right now, guys. I'll be talking to you soon. You all have a good day.